Great. Thanks, Adam. And thanks for that talk, Mitchell. It was very neat to see all the beaches of Australia. It's like being on vacation. So thank you for attending my talk today, everyone, which is on the components of the Strait of Georgia Data Center. As Adam mentioned, I work for the Pacific Salmon Foundation, a marine conservation organization based out of Vancouver, Canada. Next slide, please. So the Pacific Salmon Foundation, along with our partner, the Institute for Oceans and Fisheries at the University of British Columbia, have created a secure data archive, which is based out of the southwest corner of British Columbia, as can be seen in the map in the lower right there. And in this secure data archive, we host marine information for that region of British Columbia. You've got on the left there our webpage, which is based on WordPress and has a number of components, which I'll be getting into later in this presentation. Our portal was started in 2012 and has continued to grow from that day. Next slide, please. So here are some of the initial thoughts we had as to why there should be a portal. I wasn't involved in this, though my coworker Terry was, who will be giving a presentation later today as well. So we had all of this data coming out of Pacific Salmon Foundation, and we decided that we wanted to share it. And through that, spawned the data center. So some of these thoughts as to why we should share the data were that it leads to increased personal visibility of the scientists or conservationists. It encourages collaboration. It assists in the development of new scientific programs and studies. Reduces the risk of repetition, and allows for informed decision making, which ultimately leads to better environmental planning and policy. Next slide, please. So the objectives of the data center itself are to identify and obtain information resources relevant to the Strait of Georgia, to create a secure archive for the data, to create a web-based open access data system that allows you to access the documents and data, to provide a map-based display that allows for spatial query of the data system, and to provide a search capability within the database to allow you to search through all the data. So we've managed to accomplish all of these goals over the years. Next slide, please. And through these different components is how we managed to accomplish that. So kind of the backbone of the data center is the Marine Data BC portal, which will be shown in the next slide. We also have the OGC standard spatial data layers, which are served via GeoServer. We have a map catalog, which is based on ArcGIS software. We have a couple lists, a list of researchers, a list of publications. We have some WordPress-based web pages, which provide additional educational information on specific topics. And a recent addition to the data center is the Atlas of Oceanographic Conditions in the Strait of Georgia, which is actually mainly produced by our partners at UBC and hosted within the data center. Next slide, please. So here is the Marine Data BC portal. It has currently over 1,300 data sets referenced within it. So these are either direct data downloads or data that is stored somewhere else, and we've simply provided a link to where you can access that data. So for data all over British Columbia, we've made it much easier for people to come to one website as opposed to many, and streamline their data acquisition. This is based on GeoNetwork technology, and is also kind of combined with GeoServer technology for the mapping component, which I'll be discussing in a second. It's able to host spatial and non-spatial data. And the mapping component allows you to visualize data directly within the data portal. Next slide, please. So here we have the mapping component on the left. It's currently showing a bathymetry layer. So if I were to search in bathymetry within that initial page and then open up a record for bathymetry of the Strait of Georgia, I would then be able to click Add to Map, and it would show up here in that map shown on the left. And I would be able to click a particular point of that map to pull up additional information, in this case, the depth of the Salish Sea at that particular point. And when I say Salish Sea, that is the larger region. The Strait of Georgia is the particular body of water between Vancouver and Victoria up to Campbell River at the northern part of that bathymetry layer. So on the right, we have a metadata record. And when the portal says it has 1,300 records, it's referring to these, the metadata records. You can see they include things such as description, spatial extent of the layer. They include the publication date, who produced the data, who to contact for the data, a thumbnail, as well as the direct data download itself, which in this case is provided as an Excel workbook. And we can also add additional resources, in this case, a PDF map, which was provided by the data author. So a really powerful tool within our data center that provides a ton of information all on one page. Next slide, please. So here we get into a bit more of the nitty-gritty spatial stuff. So in order to display that layer in the GeoNetwork map, we have to first store it in a database and then host it through a spatial server. So to do this, we used PostgreSQL database cluster with PostGIST extension and host the data via GeoServer, both open source technologies. And this then allows the user to not only visualize the data in our data portal map, but also to streamline these layers directly into a GIS in a number of OGC standard formats, such as WMS, WFS, and a number of other ones. So there's currently 200 data sets that we host directly in our own database. And these are in there in situations where we are either the primary custodian, so the data was produced by the Pacific Salmon Foundation, or the data is not available elsewhere as a hosted layer, and we've collaborated with the author in order to make the data accessible to the general public. Next slide, please. So here is what I've been working on over the last few years, which is the Strait of Georgia Data Center map catalog. This is based on ArcGIS Hub technology, though just because you're using the ArcGIS Hub technology doesn't mean you only have to use Esri-based products within the map catalog. We have a few open source maps as well that are based off of leaflet technology, for example. Though I will note the majority of the maps were created using ArcGIS Online technology. So these are pre-configured maps that our team has created where they provide an educational resource to answer either a specific question or to just provide general information to the public at large. There's a number of formats of map available through this portal, non-interactive maps, interactive maps, and story maps. And I believe it was 2 days ago, we saw another example of an ArcGIS Online story map from Ireland. And this is something we've really delved into to tell stories that frame the data. Next slide, please. So here's a couple examples of the map, which I'm just going to breeze through. We have an interactive map on the left and a non-interactive map on the right. Next slide, please. Here is something that I've been working on for the last 2 years or so. It's an atlas called the Strait of Georgia Marine Reference Guide, again, based on ArcGIS technology, in particular Web App Builder for Developer. So we've got about 400 layers in this map where they're all preloaded, and using this layers list, you can search through the 400 layers either by a search bar at the top or by finding them within the individual categories. And this allows for visually comparing the layers, which is useful for decision making and marine spatial planning. Ultimately, general education. We want this map to be accessible to everyone. And this is set to launch within the next couple of years, or pardon me, next couple months. Next slide, please. Here's a couple final components, which,
Pues como el permiso lo tienen ustedes.
excuse me, there's one more after this. So we have a list of researchers which we've compiled where you can search researchers who are currently active in the Strait of Georgia. There's a small bio as well as some contact information for them, useful to anyone looking to network. We also have a list of publications where there is quite a few academic sourced papers that we've referenced. I believe it's in the range of thousands, and you can see it's current to 2021. Next slide, please. Here we have the Atlas of Oceanographic Conditions in the Strait of Georgia. So this is based off of some work happening, which was directly funded and operated by, and currently is directly funded and operated by the Pacific Salmon Foundation. So we have a vessel fleet of mosquito boats that are small vessels operated by citizen science volunteers going out multiple times a month, every month of the year, collecting oceanographic data, which we then archive in the Strait of Georgia Data Center. And our colleagues over at the University of British Columbia bring into this atlas, regularly updating the atlas with figures and text and graphs that break down the different oceanographic conditions happening that are currently happening in the Strait of Georgia. So it really allows for an in-depth look at the waters of the Strait of Georgia on a spatial and temporal scale never seen before. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, the Strait of Georgia Data Center is an open access portal to marine information for British Columbia, Canada. It's comprised of various components that deliver information to the public through direct data downloads, links to external data, geospatial layer web services, pre-configured educational maps, a list of marine publications, a list of Sail of Sea researchers, educational web pages, and an atlas of oceanographic conditions. And through offering these services, we strive to ensure the marine science and conservation communities of the Strait of Georgia have the information they need to be successful. Next slide, please. Here's my contact information in the bottom right, as well as a link to the Strait of Georgia Data Center, sogdatacenter.ca, and I encourage you to check us out to see what we're all about. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ben. That was great. We've got time for maybe one question for Ben, maybe two. So if anybody has a question for Ben, just drop it into the chat. Tanya commented the option to look at researchers is a great idea. I don't know, maybe I missed it, but are you linking there to some kind of unique ID for the researchers to identify them, maybe an ORC ID or something?
So we haven't really got into that level of depth for the behind the scenes workings of the researcher list. Right now, it's just a somewhat web-page-based approach where we will manually be updating the list as time goes on. We bring in co-op students to do that manual updating. So you can search them, although there's by name, although there's no unique ID or anything that complex. It is, I think I do agree though, it is one of the more popular sides of our website. And what's interesting is that when you search in researchers in Google, they don't necessarily always have a lot about them that shows up through Google. So usually one of the first hits you'll get is the Strait of Georgia Data Center. So our bios do get a lot of traction that way.
Super, thanks, Ben. That was brilliant. I think we might now, in the interest of time, move on to the next.